Welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC Big Box. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson Studio here on Market Street in the corner. Boy, am I glad that you joined us because we have a lot to cover. Thank you for all the comments from after the program, which we're going to get to in just a moment. It is now official. Late at night, with not a single Democrat vote, Kamala Harris is now the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. So it is now official, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. A couple other housekeeping things. Thank you to the viewers sending in the frustration that they've been experiencing when it comes to registering to vote. I just want to reiterate, I hope that you keep following up on it, because I understand you're concerned that if you were an independent or a Democrat that perhaps you would have got verification by now. I can understand the frustration. I would say make sure that you follow through, though. You don't want to show up and not be on the rolls and have it be too late, because as your point, and I can't read the whole comment here, but as your point goes, this is such an important election. I know, the most important election in anyone's lifetime ever. I know that's what the media always says, but it is extremely, extremely important. And that's why anybody having troubles, and you are not the only one that has explained to me that they're having troubles registering to vote, do not give up. Keep calling and verifying until they have you on the rolls. Okay, other comments from different viewers. Good morning, Frank. Good morning. We'll add a wave for that. Watch the Olympics and you'll see the full of hot air Kamala Harris commercials. Oh, that's where you're seeing them. Okay, I have not been watching the Olympics. In full disclosure, so I have not seen the commercials, but I know a lot of people have been talking about it. Thank you for that. Also, complacency by Republicans has no place in this extremely important election. I really believe that there was something foul going on here in New York State. Thank you for that comment. Another comment. I would add that I firmly think that all of the Electoral College votes should be divided per how the percentage of votes were finalized. Not all votes should go to a supposed winner in the national election. I think, if I understand what you're saying, let's say New York State has 10 electoral. I know it's a lot more than that, but let's just say it's 10. And, half of the people voted, or a little under half voted for Republicans, then maybe 5 of those votes should go for Trump. Is that what you're suggesting instead of the winner-take-all state? Yes, I think there's something to be said there. I think that's a valid point, the winner-take-all idea. Thank you. Another comment from a different viewer. So, Frank, I'm sorry. I already read that one. So, Frank, I just heard the RFK Jr. bear story. Yeah. And I can't help but think of the Papua New Guinea and the Biden's uncle story, who was allegedly eaten by cannibals. Why? Not because they're similar, or any similarities between the two stories, but they are both so bizarre. What are the Democrats, we'll say, thinking? No, it says here, what are the Democrats smoking? That is a weird, weird story. He had to skid into it because he knew it was going to break in that New Yorker piece. There's a big piece of why is RFK Jr. running? What does he want? Something like that is the headline. So he knew it was going to come out, so he does the clip ahead of time explaining it, about what had happened. What it is an odd story. I know Morning Joe, I guess, spent about 10 minutes discussing it. They think they're funnier than they are, not really understanding that, yes, people do eat bear meat. But anyway, yes, it is definitely the story between that, what was a goat, or some speculated dog. He said it was a goat that he was eating. Then you've got the brain worm. List goes on and on. Another comment from a different viewer. Here's a thought. Biden wants to change the Supreme Court. It is not his job to think things up. It's his job to do the will of the people. All government in this country should operate this way. What the people ask for is what the government does. All government has lost this. Yes, that's just a play to his base. He started that conversation before he had dropped out of the race. And the argument he was making is, yes, this was not going to be done before the end of my first term, but that gives us 4 more years after we win to work on it. So it was kind of a blustery type thing. Well, they released a quote-unquote reform, and Kamala Harris kind of co-sponsored it now. So it will not be the end of that discussion. We have quite a few other issues to get to. Look at that already, all those comments, just to kick off the program. Did you see that Nancy Pelosi and Biden haven't talked since she helped push him out over the weekend? She was kind of sly in her response. Did you stab Biden in the back, get him out? And she kind of smiled and said, no, not at all, type thing. And then now she's saying that she wants him on Mount Rushmore. Well, we may talk about that a little bit later on. First of all, I wanted to give you an update from a story brought to you last week. That death penalty deal for the mastermind, or the death penalty free deal, I should say, for the masterminds of the 9/11 terror attack. Well, one mastermind and two others who participated in the plot, is surprised Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Does this show strength inside the White House, inside the Pentagon, at a time when we need to be showing strength? What's happening in the Middle East? But I'll continue. They have since revoked the agreement. That happened on Friday. This is not something that the Secretary was consulted on. We were not aware that the prosecution or defense would enter the terms of the plea deal. They added that the Secretary of Defense thought the best course of action would be for each of the accused to head to trial. He believes that the families and the American public deserve the opportunity to see military commission trials carried out in this case. What is going on behind the scenes? Well, I mean, I'm glad that the decision has been reversed. Don't get me wrong. But the fact that it was ever put up in the first place and now showing that weakness within the White House and specifically within the Pentagon here, we were surprised. We didn't expect it either. But it doesn't give you a lot of confidence, does it? Now, according to the White House, Joe Biden and the United States are in round-the-clock push against a Mideast war. Joe Biden held crisis talks on Monday on a potential Iranian counterattack on Israel, as his administration said it was working around the clock to avoid all-out war in the Middle East. Biden and Secretary of State Blinken engaged in frantic diplomacy to try to ease tensions sparked by a suspected Israeli attack that killed that Hamas political leader. The president called King Abdullah II of Jordan, which helped down Iranian drones and missiles in an earlier showdown in April, while Blinken called top officials in Qatar and Egypt the key intermediaries seeking a ceasefire in the 10-month Israel-Hamas war. Now, we heard last week that the killing of that terrorist, the mastermind behind October 7th, well, that just isn't helping our negotiations with a ceasefire. That was President Biden's stance on the killing of a terrorist. We are engaged in intense diplomacy, pretty much around the clock, with a very simple message. All parties must refrain from escalation, Blinken said. It is also critical that we break this cycle by reaching a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, when he says pretty much around the clock, does that mean from 10 in the morning till 4 p.m.? Or does it really mean around the clock? I think that's a question that's fair to ask. Now, there has been reports that rockets were fired at U.S. personnel at an Iraqi Air Force base. At least 2 rockets were reported to have been fired in Iraq, which in the base which houses Americans, and that several people were injured. We can confirm that it was a suspected rocket attack today against U.S. and coalition forces, and I'm going to try it here, Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. Initial indication are that several U.S. personnel were injured. Base personnel are conducting a post-attack damage assessment. We will provide updates as more information becomes available. President Biden issued a statement on social media that he and Vice President Harris were briefed in the Situation Room regarding developments in the Middle East. We received updates on the threats posed by Iran and its proxies, diplomatic efforts to de-escalate regional tensions, and preparations to support Israel should it be attacked again. We also discussed the steps we were taking to defend our forces and respond to any attack against our personnel in a manner and place of our choosing. So it'll be curious to see if we respond to that, how we respond to that. But it was reported on Sunday, I believe, that the Iran attack could happen as early as Monday. Now, yesterday did not. Around the clock diplomacy, according to the White House. So that is just an update from a story that we brought to you pretty extensively yesterday. So with the virtual roll call Kamala Harris is now the Democrat nominee for the 2024 race. It sounds as if she's still having some difficulties deciding who she wants as her number two. It's between that Walz and Shapiro. So we're going to talk about the Veep race. We also have quite a few things here about Harris in general. We're going to talk about Trump's campaign. Also a couple things here about Biden as well on some of his policies. And, of course, the stock market crash yesterday that the media is trying to do their best to downplay or not even talk about because of, obviously, the implications on the November election. So we've got the stocks plummeting. We've got very serious troubles in the Middle East. But again, the momentum is behind Harris, according to everyone in the media. So we'll talk about that as well. Let's not get too far ahead. I know yesterday and the last couple days I run so late that our last couple breaks are kind of quick. So we're not going to do that this morning. I'm not going to run too far behind. A little bit later on in the show, though, we will tell you who was the winner of the Filler Up campaign for the Salvation Army of Corning. But that's later on in the show. So stay with us. There is no Steuben Senior Services Fund interview this morning. We had so much to catch up on. I kept this day free, though we do have guests the rest of the week. One guest in particular, fan favorite, former Congressman Joe Semplinsky, will be joining us on Thursday, so make sure that you tune in early. Tune in for the full 2 hours. You never know what time he's going to show and how much time we have to spend together, but you can get your questions in already if you would like for the former Congressman Joe Semplinsky. Okay, stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on the street. Thank you for joining us this morning. One viewer, the Democratic Party, the difference between Democratic Party and the Democratic Party, it was originally called later Democrats, the party, the Democratic Party. It was in the late 80s, I think, is when really Republicans started calling it the Democrat Party, if I understand the history right. I could do a little more research on that, but that's the way I've always understood it. So yes, the Democratic Party, they love the term, but yet when you talk about democracy and democratic principles, we're not currently seeing that from the party as their nominee, specifically not receiving a single vote to be the nominee for President of the United States. Yet yesterday, with that, in the dead of the night, virtual roll call, Kamala Harris has become the Democrat nominee. Oh, the music kept going. I apologize. Okay. I apologize. I didn't realize the music kept going. It hasn't done that in a while. Thank you for saying that. So the issue with to the viewer about the Democrat Party, it was originally set up as the Democratic Party and that the members were Democrats. I think Republicans at one point started leaning, obviously, for obvious reasons, more into calling them the Democrat Party. So the way I understand the history is it was originally when the first Democratic National Convention and all of that was originally established, it was Democratic. But I understand your point because the party has lost, if they ever had those values of democracy. When you look at the virtual roll call in the dead of the night, last night, that elected Kamala Harris, who has never received a single vote for the Democratic nomination for presidency of the United States, never receiving a single vote. Not the last time she ran, not this time, is now, if you're a Democrat, your nominee for president of the United States. She has received votes from 99% of the Democratic National Committee delegates. The deadline for Democratic National Committee delegates to cast their ballots to elect the Democratic presidential nominee ended at 6 p.m. on Monday. I know I said dead of the night. I was being a little bit hyperbole there. After a 5-day round of online voting, Harris was the only candidate who qualified for the virtual roll call, an electronic ballot, getting more than the required 300 delegates to back her. The DNC said she already had the majority of delegate support as of Friday afternoon. The virtual roll call began Thursday after the delegates voted to nominate Harris online to get a nominee before state ballot deadline. So we expected this. DNC leaders argued that voting in Harris before the convention, slated to begin on August 19th, would be too late and could open up possibilities for Republicans to litigate Harris being on the ballot in states like Ohio that have ballot deadlines of August the 7th. So that's kind of the, allegedly, that's the reason for kind of the rush job. Harris will also be ceremoniously sworn in during the convention in Chicago alongside her vice president. She has yet to announce that running mate, of course. That is supposed to be announced today at that rally. She has not made up her mind, though talks have narrowed down to Walz and Shapiro. We're going to talk about the VP race here in just a moment. This virtual roll call, though, well, it's hard to keep track of because they were going to move it so many times because, remember, they wanted Biden. No more questions about Biden stepping down. No more questions about his mental health. So they were going to swear him in and this virtual roll call very early in the process until there was outrage from some, again, of the Democrat elites who were trying to find quick ways to oust him. And the Piers Morgan, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but he has a piece here about the hypocrisy of the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, who kind of stabbed the loyal Democrat Biden in the back to get him out of there, and now are calling for him to be on Mount Rushmore, comparing him to George Washington. We'll talk about that. But as I said, Walz is on the short list. Listen to this guy. This is just a weird side note. Nothing too heavy here. It's a Brooklyn guy. He's called a cyber squatter. He purchased a website named HarrisWalz.com back in 2020. He's been sitting on this for 4 years. And now he's looking for $15,000 if Harris picks Walz as her running mate. Jeremy Green Etch, a trademark lawyer, bought the URL for just $8.99 in hopes of Harris and Walz one day forming a Democratic presidential ticket. 4 years later, the 36-year-old Big Apple attorney's cheap investment could potentially yield major dividends, as Walz is one of the two finalists being considered by Harris. Boy, this guy's got to be sweating bullets, huh? Etch is willing to sell the HarrisWalz.com website name to Harris's campaign for the same price he sold the Clinton Kane website back in 2016, $15,000. So, listen, this guy does this a lot, apparently, because it's not as if he made a prediction. If he got Clinton Kane, he's just looking at the political tea leaves, trying to make a little cash. I know I could just donate it, but that is not really how this works, Etch said. People with billboards aren't donating their billboards to the campaign. It is just a property, basically. Even though he's a Harris supporter, he wants that $15,000, which, let's face it, $15,000 with the campaign cash she has on hand, not really a problem. As you have been made aware, as we've been talking about frequently, never has big money been so important in a presidential race. Not only securing Harris's momentum, but also essentially pushing Biden out to begin with the Democrat elites and big money no longer in his corner. It was all over but the shouting. Now, so I just wanted to mention that guy real quick. Good investment, kind of like a lotto ticket. So I know we have Democrat viewers, and I asked this a couple questions this morning to anybody. The fact that she is now the nominee, having never received a single vote to be the Democratic nominee for president, does that take away some of the oomph of this all Republicans are a threat to democracy tagline? Or does it not matter? Because there's been so much hypocrisy in this whole race. Is it not even an issue anymore? My thought is it's not an issue because it doesn't matter if it was Harris. It doesn't matter if it was Biden. There would still be the all-out support for anybody other than Trump in the Democrat Party. So I don't think it really matters who's in the seat. Yes, it does to independent voters and people on the fence, of course. I'm saying to the Democrat voters themselves, it did not matter. They wanted the process to be done with. They wanted Biden out. They got what they wanted. So now they're happy having never had their say in who would be running for president of the United States. But does that take away, at least to you, a little bit of that strength that they keep trying to project when they say that Trump is a threat to democracy? Now, we know that that in and of itself is not truthful. That the media would, if it was on the shoe was on the other foot, they would be having fact check after fact check, calling it false. But that is what they're running on. from a person who never received a single vote to be their nominee for president of the United States. Let's take another break. Stay with us. Keep those comments coming in. Keep the waves coming in. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We've got to, listen, I know you watch plenty of news, and so you've seen the bias. Listen to this from CNN, who, again, no longer hides the bias. This specifically from Stephen Collinson. The stunning transformation of the 2024 presidential race will reach new heights Tuesday when Vice President Kamala Harris unveils her running mate after a sequence of events that left Republican nominee Donald Trump flailing. Harris is due to join her vice presidential pick at a rally in Philadelphia that will kick off a joint sprint across an electoral map expanded by President Biden's shelving of his own re-election bid just over 2 weeks ago. Now, I just mentioned that. You know the bias, but it's not even hidden anymore. While the naming of the Democratic vice presidential pick is the focus of the campaign, new development Monday outside a race that has been on a momentum trajectory since Trump escaped an assassination attempt and Biden pulled out, hinted at potential new twists to come before November. Economic and Middle East drama loom as Harris makes her pick. If we would have saw what happened with stocks yesterday during, let's say, the Trump presidency, or if Trump is to win in November and that were to happen during his, do you think they would just call it drama? I don't want to go through any more of this because you see the bias no matter what outlet, not no matter, but most outlets that you go to. Now, right now it does look like it is Walz versus Shapiro. Carson Swick at the New York Post put together, and I know we have many viewers out there from Pennsylvania. What do you think of your governor? They said that he has a very high approval rating. A lot of Democrats in Pennsylvania are big fans of Governor Josh Shapiro, but not all of them want Kamala Harris to make him her vice presidential pick. Cumberland County couple Candace and David Triddle said they're happy with the governor where he is and don't want Pennsylvania to lose Shapiro to Pennsylvania Avenue. We think he's a great governor, and we'd hate to lose him. So they support Mark Kelly. I was kind of surprised Mark Kelly was taken out of the race, at least according to recent reports, that it is down to Walz and Shapiro. Because, as we had mentioned, according to sources close to the Biden family, Obama actually wanted to be Mark Kelly as a nominee. And you think about it, he didn't even get a vote. He did as an elitist, don't get me wrong, in the Democrat Party. But he didn't get a physical ballot to vote on Harris either. It blows me away the way this all played out. So they said, basically, he's just so darn good that Pennsylvania doesn't want to lose him. Do you agree if you are a Pennsylvania resident? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And the reason I think, and I'm not making any kind of predictions, I just personally think it'll be Shapiro, is because that's where the big money wants it to go. Hollywood elites, this coming from Deadline, Hollywood elites want it to be Shapiro. And remember, at the end of the day, this election is the most, specifically the Democrat Party, has been the most controlled by big money. From the ouster of Biden to the now momentous trajectory, as CNN said, of her campaign. And now, if at the end of the day, this is what switches her decision to Shapiro, not switches, makes up her mind for Shapiro. If all goes as planned, America and the world will know in the next few hours who Kamala Harris has picked to be her running mate. However, in the corridors of Hollywood power and money, an overwhelming favorite choice has emerged. Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania wins the election, said one executive. The exec promptly added of why the Keystone State's governor would be the best fit for VP. And the presumptive Democrat nominee just over 2 weeks long White House bid in a still tight electoral college battle with Trump. With the decision coming down to the wire ahead of the convention, Shapiro, along with Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Senator Mark Kelly, individually met with the vice president over the weekend. We know that. This is like a mini primary for the second spot, with one vote that matters, a producer said. Harris could do no wrong right now, so whoever she picks, people will get behind. I know this is going to be frustrating, folks, but first of all, they're right. No matter who she picks is going to be a historic and great pick for VP. No matter who. You can already see the coverage of that. You can already see the writing on the wall. I don't bring that up for this to get frustrated any more than we already are. But remember, they only have a few short months to cover up any of her gaffes, cover up any of her far left ideology in the past. So this is going to be a very, very, very frustrating few months as you watch the media's coverage. But at the end of the day, if the Hollywood power and money want it to be Shapiro, I'd be pretty shocked if it's not Shapiro. Now, having said that, and what this executive, anonymous executive, is saying, doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter who it is. They're still going to support her. So it's not as if she can make, if it's Walz, it doesn't mean Hollywood money isn't still going to go to Walz and Harris's campaign. Whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the White House. So ask yourself, who do you think Harris is leaning towards today? They know each other well, get along, and that chemistry is important, the source added. Shapiro is good on TV, good on social, looks straight out of West Wing casting. One big donor joked. And that, I don't want to go through the whole history of West Wing. So there you go. What are your thoughts on the VP race? We're going to talk a little bit about the convention, a few more things here about Harris's campaign. Nancy Pelosi coming up here in a little bit. What else? Secret Service updates. Maybe a couple New York updates. Yeah, no, I don't want to give too much away, but keep those comments coming in. You see the number on the bottom of your screen. I see a couple that we'll mention when we come back. So let me take a short break because, again, I'm not trying to run too long this morning. And we will get right back into it after this. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, please stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. A comment from a viewer. Frank, what's your take on Raskin's statement that they are prepared to stop Trump's election? Sounds like a promise of insurrection and a move to disenfranchise anyone's vote for Trump. He is the real threat to our republic. If you're not familiar with what this viewer is talking about, I was going to get to that a little bit later on. And so I'm probably not going to dive too deep into it right at this moment. But video surfaced yesterday, and of course it's not making the media rounds unless you go to certain media outlets. And it was a panel discussion from back in February of 2024, which is this year, but back in February, in which Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, speculated that Congress would have to invalidate an election victory by former President Trump at the risk of civil war. Now, to be fair, because we are actually fair on this outlet, it is not clear whether Raskin was actually outlining a plan of action or rather using a hypothetical to argue that the U.S. Supreme Court was placing what he considered an undue burden on Congress to keep Trump out of office. And I want to read the exact quote. Perhaps I'm not going to read the longest part of it, but perhaps the one with the most weight so you'll understand and make the call for yourself. Quote, and the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so they want to kick it to Congress, so it's going to be up to us on January 6th of 2025 to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. Raskin was incorrect in that he claimed that not all the 9 judges would block Democrats' attempt to exclude Trump from the ballot. His reference to great protection is also strange, since if you remember, Kavanaugh and others were targeted. So the whole thing was kind of a mess. But I'm sure you did not see that on the mainstream media. But I actually have examples that go, I'm not going to say further, but go right in line with that coming up a little bit later on. So thank you for highlighting that. Yes, it's very scary. These are the kind of things that, to this viewer's point, if it were said by Trump or Republican, it would be in the news nonstop, 24/7, if not worse. You could be looking at, charges of insurrection, those type of things. Now, as something that we've been talking about on the program and speculating about, indeed, pro-Palestinian, or as they have become, anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-police protests, are the activists themselves are preparing to rally at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. This is a piece from the LA Times. They go through, I hate when they have articles like this where they go through individuals before they start talking about the overall picture of what is happening. But, quote, Palestine is this generation's Vietnam War. We're unabashed about the Palestinian right to self-defense to end Israeli genocide. We have momentum. I don't think we'll lose any steam with Biden out of the race. Kamala Harris and other Democrats are still backing Israel. Yeah, they can't be very happy with the way things are turning right now with Israel taking out that terrorist. We know that specifically when it comes to Iran, Biden even asking our allies, don't start questioning Iran's nuclear capabilities or how close they're coming to the nuclear capabilities, because we don't want to ruffle any feathers before the election. So yes, I know we've heard with Shapiro, if she is to pick Shapiro, there's already Democrat anti-Israel protesters calling him Genocide Josh. So she's got to walk a tightrope in who her ultimate decision is on that, and how important that anti-Israel section, and I don't know how big that base is. It must be, or that section of their party, because it must be pretty big, because they seem to be changing their policies at the drop of a hat to kind of coddle these anti-Israel protesters. So I don't really know the answer to that. But is it enough that it changes their mind on Shapiro? Or, as we mentioned earlier, the big money donors from Hollywood looking towards Josh Shapiro. Though at the end of the day, we've got to remember, they may say that now, and this may be part of the Veep stakes, as it's so corny called. It could be a part of this. Some other, Shapiro's people release that interview, whatever. But at the end of the day, the big money's still going to go to Harris and whoever she picks. Because it's just like with Biden. They said the money was drying up. Well, they just sat on that money, and as soon as Biden stepped aside, look how much of that money went to Harris. Again, proving that big donors, that big money the Democrats always talk about, are deciding the fate of the Democrat Party and their presidential nominee. But pro-Palestinian, as they've so kindly put it here at the LA Times, but we've seen it, the anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-police activists are preparing to rally at the Democrat convention in Chicago. I see this being cracked down, not in the way that Mayor Daley did back in '68, but you could definitely see there being a crackdown, so it's not on cameras, or the media will refuse to show it, because they don't want that split screen of a historic night for Harris and for the country, for the Democrat Party. Historic. You can see it already, the writing on it. They don't want the contrast with that of Democrats protesting their own party. Now, that would be interesting, too. If you're one of these, we'll put it kindly, because some of these college students, I do believe, have been duped. If you are a pro-Palestinian activist, doesn't that frustrate you, too, that you never had a say in who the president is or the nominee for president is? Because if you look at this at face value, Harris, though I don't believe Harris or Biden are that strong of supporters of Israel, but they believe those two are, or at least Biden. So does that frustrate you when, as a pro-Palestinian, or whatever your issue is as a Democrat, that you never had a single say in who was going to run for the president on the Democratic ticket? Boy, and now, like they said, that mini primary for VP, mini primary, one person gets to pick. One elite, Kamala Harris, gets to pick who the VP is. So using the term primary is a little fast and loose there, isn't it? The only part of this process that they can maybe call a primary, and it's still up to one person coming from the party of constant lecturing on democracy. I don't know. I would be very, very frustrated. I'm surprised that you don't see more there. But the media is not going to cover it, just like the media is not going to cover that what is arguably one of the biggest cover-ups in presidential history, which is keeping Joe Biden and his mental decline out of the public eye, and Harris, of course, a part of that cover-up as well. But we got to take another break. Keep those comments coming in. Keep those waves coming in. It's not just all about Harris this morning. We do have other topics to discuss, and I know we find out today about the VP. So if you want to make your guess, if you want to make your prediction, I would love to hear from you. But supposedly, we'll be hearing whether it's Walz or Shapiro, but those are what they're media reporting. Who knows? Maybe it's someone from out of nowhere that we weren't expecting. I was surprised that Mark Kelly's name seems to be taken out of the running. I would find that shocking. I don't know what would cause that to happen. We have some other things that we're going to get to as well, some New York State issues, and who knows? Who knows what we'll cover? That's why you got to stay tuned for the full program. But let's take another break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking. Got another comment in, and they admitted that there was going to be some bad grammar here, so I tried to tighten it up. I hope I didn't lose your point. Harris, not a word on the stock market, the war to come, U.S. troops under attack from Iran, storm damage from rain on the coast, but no fracking. We hear about that a lot. Wow, only bad Trump. That's all we hear about is how bad Trump is over and over. She cares nothing about food prices, storm damage. Obama is running things behind the scene while media calls her a queen. Who cares about your 401k? The media's coverage of yesterday's stock market crash is a fascinating look inside how biased they can really be. The lack of coverage, the downplaying of what was happening, and we're going to talk about it more in depth in a little bit, but the downplaying of it. Could you imagine? Don't even take Trump out of the equation. Imagine if this was happening during a George W. Bush administration, the George W. Bush that they now fawn over and said how great he was. You ever notice how the current Republican president is always the most evil person to ever live? But then they reminisce after a few years, only when they need to for political reasons. They don't really miss George W. Bush. But they can always say, look, we're not biased. Now we care. Now, there's a new clip of Vice President Kamala Harris from 2017 calling on, quote, everybody to be woke. This has resurfaced on social media, sparking critics and conservatives to lambaste the now official Democratic nominee. Quote, we have to stay woke, like everybody needs to be woke. Let me say that again. We have to stay woke, like everybody needs to be woke. And you could talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Then Senator Harris said back in 2017. I get upset when we say we're going to shut our door to refugees who are fleeing such atrocities and have been standing in line for 2 years to qualify for refugee status, and they arrive here and we turn them away. Yes, I'm going to get mad about that. I'm going to get mad when we have an attorney general who's trying to resurrect the war on drugs, and he thinks the greatest evil that mankind has ever seen is marijuana. Leave grandma's medical marijuana alone, Harris said. Harris doubled down on her comment in a message posted a day later, which read, we have to stay active, we have to stay woke. Now, many of you are familiar, but if you're not, I think it's only fair to do our due diligence here. The use of the word woke grew in popularity back in 2017. That's why she was using it. She's always trying to be up on the trends awkwardly. When dictionaries such as Oxford and Merriam-Webster's added the phrase to their lexicons, defining it as people who are attentive to issues such as social justice. It has since become a catch-all word for left-wing issues and agenda. So this coming back, and this is being reported by Fox News, so that was making the rounds yesterday. We all need to stay woke. And there you are. Oh, man, I don't want to spend the whole... Well, there's still quite a few. What did you think about... I know we heard from one viewer. What did you think about... Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. RFK Jr. and the bear scenario. I don't... Listen, I don't want to spend too much time talking about RFK Jr. He's obviously... It's been one thing after another. I don't think many are taking his chances seriously. But if you are, maybe you're a supporter, or maybe you don't like the attacks on him, let me know what you think. He seems to take awkward pictures of himself, doesn't he? Whether it's that goat or dog, whoever you're talking to, or whether it's this bear where he's making it look like he's biting his hand. Even joking after that picture surfaced that maybe that's where I got the brain worm. Can I just say, take a step back. Forget who you support, who you don't support. Forget RDI, any of that. What a weird time to be living in with presidential politics and politics in general. Did you ever imagine a day here in August that would look like this? But keep in mind, it is August. So there is not a lot of time to run a presidential campaign. And so that's why I've been saying it over and over again, that I believe the media will just run out the clock, fawn over Harris, say that the momentous trajectory has been going since day one. They won't, of course, talk about Trump and the assassination attempt or his peace and prosperity during his term. They won't talk about Harris's political agenda or political past. This is all going to be, and there's actually a piece about this I'm going to get to later on. It's all about teleprompter speeches and celebrities who attend her rallies. And that's really what it's going to boil down to at the end of the day. And I think somebody had a comment. Maybe I forgot to read it. I did have it on my list and maybe it didn't print out. But, they talk about her momentous trajectory. And I know I keep using that, but that's the term that Stephen Collinson used at CNN. That she's not really getting huge turnouts at a rally. But, again, that's where we're at. We're going to hear about this. And it's very Hillary Clinton-esque, if you think about it, where bring the celebrities in to pack people in. And then maybe they can show bigger support, because that's one thing they tried to at the very beginning, and they still try to a little bit, but downplay how big Trump's rallies were. Do you remember in the early days where you'd see these fields full of people or full arenas with people standing out line? They go, oh, there wasn't that many people. He's exaggerating. Or this is just anecdotal. It means nothing. Well, they know that it has an impact, so they've been trying to pack people into Democrat rallies. That's why they had the big fundraiser when Biden was still running, which was Biden and Obama and Clinton and some celebrity guests. It's the same old tactic. But if you are just waking up, if you are just joining us, last night was the virtual roll call, and Kamala Harris is now the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. If you are a Democrat, we're thinking of maybe voting Democrat. Does that concern you? The lack of votes by Democratic voters, not having a say in who their candidate is? Or is it of my mindset, which they don't care because it's really a vote against Trump at the end of the day, no matter what, when the smoke clears? Doesn't matter how good or bad the candidate was going to be, whether it's Biden, even though we saw the mental health issues, fine, well, they'll still vote for him. Same with Harris, or as long as it's not Trump. That's kind of my thought. But I would love to hear your take on it as we take another short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, wrapping up our number one here on WYDC TV Big Fox as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning. Let's go through some viewer comments, shall we? First up, to me, woke equals an agenda of dependency. Interesting point. That's one accurate definition. Thank you. Another comment from a different viewer. This is from Ken in Horseheads. Things that make you say, huh? Why would RFK Jr. decide during his presidential race to recant a story about stashing a bear cub in Central Park years ago? There's no chance that this would help him get votes. Well, let me address that first point specifically. Ken, the way I understand it, because I was wondering the same thing. Why would this isn't even a fun story, right? There's no upside to this. Kind of like Noam talking about shooting her dog. There is no upside to telling that story. I know you think it makes you look tough. So I wondered the same thing with RFK Jr. Now, I guess the New Yorker was going to break the story. He had a big piece coming out in the New Yorker, about him. And I think it's titled something, don't quote me on this. It's like, what does RFK Jr. want? Or something like that. So this was going to come out. So he got ahead of it. That's why he told the story before it came out. To kind of, he would hope, stop the blow a little bit to make it not as impactful. I don't think that worked. But that was the reasoning of the timing of telling that story. I'm not sure. I've not read the full New Yorker piece. I'm not sure if it was an anonymous source that was telling that story, if he let it slip. I don't know the answer there. But that is why we saw the initial videos with Roseanne Barr come out over the weekend. That was to kind of curb what was coming out of the New Yorker. The next point that Ken is making, if true, Alvin Bragg is looking into trying to charge RFK Jr. with a crime. If anyone was on the fence that lawfare was being used to influence the election, this action would surely convince them that that is it. I'm not sure. I haven't heard that about Alvin Bragg. I know that there was something about the statute of limitations that I heard in passing this morning as I was getting ready for work, that the statute of limitations had expired. I don't know what the statute of limitations. Well, first of all, we know that means nothing to Alvin Bragg, so don't think I'm discrediting if that happens. The statute of limitations mean very little to Mr. Bragg, but I didn't know there was. Just such a weird story. But yes, thank you, Ken. I hope I did an okay job with that. Next up, Trump should have RFK Jr. be part of the debates. That way he can use it against Harris, showing that she is scared to debate Trump. Okay, I need some follow-up question on this. Are you saying that if Harris doesn't do the Fox debate, just have it be RFK Jr. and Trump? I'm not seeing a lot of upside. I think Trump would be a lot better off if he just had it at that point say, oh, Harris isn't here, we're going to do a town hall type event and let the people in the crowd ask questions and essentially run a rally like he does. Also, I know the problem with having more, if they had even Harris, Trump, and RFK Jr., the problem is that Cuomo was kind of brilliant at this. What he would demand, because he was a lead dog when he was running for governor, he'd say, okay, I'll debate the Republican challenger, but it's got to be anybody who's going to be on the ballot. Well, in New York City, there was like 20 people on the ballot. There's some wackadoo parties out there that can just get on the ballot. So he knew all the time would be eaten up by the other candidates that stood no chance, but that he could essentially give his introduction, say what he wants to say, maybe a little bit back and forth here and there, but the other candidates would focus on their campaign, getting their name out. And so I think that would be the problem. If it is Trump-Harris, if they agree to a debate, we don't want to take time away from those two debating with RFK Jr., who many people speculate, and you can argue with me, I'm just saying, many people believe does not have a chance to be president. But I understand the meaning behind your statement. Don't get me wrong. But again, if Trump debates RFK Jr., it gives him a little bit too much credit. RFK Jr. a little too much credibility. Is an unnecessary kind of ad that can end up hurting Trump in the long run by taking away some of those votes. Hey, I just realized I'm running really late. Didn't even bring us up a story in that last break. Just going through comments. So many. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'll respond. You're right, though. I understand what you're saying now. Okay, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. That's kind of mean of me not to tell everybody what I was just reading. But I'll tell you, coming up after this, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back. It is hard to believe, but it's already hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. Thank you. Nice try. They tried to get me again. Thank you for joining us. And the music was going to play long, but I caught it. If you are just joining us, welcome. You've missed a lot, and we've got a lot to cover. Let's go through a few comments as we hit the ground running, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Yes to the Fox debate. Okay, so if you are just joining us, this viewer was saying, have RFK Jr. on the debate floor with Trump when Harris turns down the Fox News debate to kind of show her weakness, not willing to debate. And then the viewer says, if Trump is the debater we know, which we know, RFK Jr. is good bait to take votes away from Harris. It'd be priceless. It'd be fun to watch. I don't know if it's the best thing for Trump's campaign or not. I guess I'd have to think about that a little bit further. Different comment from a different viewer. Good morning, Frank. Good morning. I'm going to count that as a wave. Unfortunately, I believe that you are right. The left will drag out celebrities to excite the unaware voters. Also, the simple, never Trump crowd. I agree. I agree with myself. No, I agree with you as well. The celebrities are going to be a major part of this campaign. Don't be surprised. And I'm just warning you. Don't be surprised if a major endorsement like a Taylor Swift comes through, which to you and me doesn't mean a hill of beans in politics, from the sense of standpoints. Like when we joked about George Clooney calling for Biden to step aside, the way George Clooney goes, the way the country goes, that was kind of a joke, but he does have apparently quite a bit of power. But it's kind of like social media. Social media may mean nothing to you. Absolutely nothing. You might laugh when people say how important social media is. At the end of the day, it is very important. A lot of people get their news from it. You can laugh at it. That's the case. The same goes with celebrities. You might laugh and say, oh, that endorsement, oh, no, now I'm going to vote because George Clooney told me to, or whoever it is. You know not to follow that trend. Unfortunately, to this viewer's point, the unaware voters and some of the Never Trump crowd, it works. Here's one. I don't know if you can call her a major celebrity anymore, but it's worth mentioning. Rosie O'Donnell has vowed to not remove Kamala t-shirts until she is elected. She claims she purchased 100 Kamala t-shirts, and she vowed not to remove them until Vice President Harris is elected president. In a virtual call hosted by the group Comics for Kamala, is Rosie O'Donnell considered a comic? She said, I know that the day that... So now there is really going to be a Zoom meeting for everything. Comics for Kamala. Okay. I know that the day that President Biden stepped down, the most glorious act of generosity and patriotism, I went out and bought 100 Kamala t-shirts. I will not take them off until she's in that White House. And I believe in her. I believe in the spirit that she brings back to all of us. We need somebody in the White House who's going to fight for equality for all people. And that is certainly not the orange clown man. It is definitely Kamala Harris, and I've never met her, and I only met Donald Trump twice. I guess that is what equates to comics now. Calling Trump the orange clown man. Is that still in any way, shape, or form funny? I think you could make the argument that it never was, but the fact that they are beating it to death. Rich Lowry, and I'm not suggesting he watches, frankly speaking. I'm just saying there's some ring here that you may remember from yesterday's show and last week's show. Kamala Harris isn't in the cellar of the Naval Observatory campaigning via Zoom calls a la Joe Biden in 2020. No, she's speaking to adoring crowds fired up by pop stars, going back to our comment. She's identifying herself with powerful cultural trends. She's clapping back against Donald Trump with panache. Indeed, one of the greatest political transformations of our time, she's gone from a subpar vice president to the second coming of Barack Obama in the space of about 2 weeks. Except Obama was a genuine political talent who was glib enough to handle almost anything. He wasn't an intellectual, but was a writer with intellectual interests. In another life, he could have been a staffer at the New Yorker instead of the president of the United States. The people most aware that Kamala isn't truly a new version of Obama are the people around her who clearly fear putting her in any setting where she isn't reading from a script. Biden's basement campaign in 2020 kept him from having to go out and build a crowd, but he did interviews. Kamala's teleprompter campaign in 2024 is meant to limit her exposure to keep her from inadvertently bursting the media bubble that's been created around her, much like that media bubble that protected Biden for so long with his health. It was that bubble of they will do anything to protect him. Because keep in mind, if he would have stayed in, they would still be saying he was doing great things. They would still be propping him up. So you've got to keep in mind that the media here is building the same type of bubble around Harris as they did around Biden. Her campaign may resemble the pre-debate Biden approach this year more than his limited stumping in 2020. Biden's campaign this year obviously feared putting him out in any setting where he'd be challenged. And when his abysmal debate performance forced them to do so anyway to prove he just had a bad night, the additional exposure resulted in predictable disaster. Kamala's problem isn't messing up names or dates or losing her train of thought, the hallmarks of aging. Rather, she often ends up repeating the same, usually banal, thought in slightly different words. So she expresses herself in an endless loop, as you've seen time and time again. And one of her few off-script comments since her coronation, she explained last Friday why President Biden should get credit for the prisoner swap, saying, and I quote, "This is just extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strengths that rest in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances." For those keeping track, that's 3 understands, 2 diplomacies, and 2 strengths in one sentence. All that she said is that it's important that Biden understands diplomacy, but she didn't know how to land the plane after starting the simple idea in a brief sentence. Because Kamala hasn't been out there, we don't know in her own words how she feels about the amazing turn of events over the last 2 weeks, how she plans to lead, or, and this is important, how she explains her multiple changes in positions since she last ran for president. Yes, isn't there major issues that we should be asking her now with the stocks, what's happening in the Middle East? Shouldn't there be a press conference? If a presidential candidate flip-flops on one thing during a campaign, it's usually a focus of discussion for weeks. She's done so on about 8 things with no explanation whatsoever and without generating any significant media static. Well, the media doesn't want to do anything whatsoever to harm her. So they are not going to call for press conferences. They're not going to call her out on the flip-flops, which would normally be major news cycles, because yes, maybe in the past they would have, because they knew they had time to turn it around. Now they don't want to do it because they only have a few short months of a presidential campaign. So any scandal or any big controversy could really break this momentum that this tremendous trajectory that she's on, which they can keep her on for a few short months. And they don't want to do that because the first time they have to break that with what they're showing you right now, like what Lowry's saying, that she's the second coming of Obama, they do not want to change the narrative at all because they know they can ride it out until November. Okay, I want to continue here, though. If you were them, wouldn't you want to keep it that way as well? The campaign will eventually need to do some interviews. Perhaps they will address the criticism that she's being kept from the media with some appearances on MSNBC and with sympathetic influencers. Then they can address the further criticism that Kamala is only talking to partisan outlets with a sit-down with a relatively safe journalist who has credibility in the broader media, say a Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes. Besides that, back to the teleprompter. It's extraordinary that the Democrats had one presidential candidate whom they didn't trust with interviews and have replaced him with another, fresh and younger candidate whom they also don't trust with interviews and who they have to build this bubble around and who they have to protect. This is why Trump has to debate Harris. Given the way she has been hiding from the media, a debate or debates may have to be one of the main means of trying to expose her. She's out of the basement, but she's never off script. That's why I was kind of surprised that Trump didn't jump right on the debate and saying now it's Fox or nothing. I hope he changes his tune on that, because I do believe he wants that debate. Because again, it is not going to be difficult for the media to keep this bubble around her. Think of how long they kept it around Biden. Years. So you don't think it's going to be easy for them to keep this bubble around Harris until November and talk about nothing but how bad Trump is and how amazing her trajectory has been the last 2 weeks, and then it'll be 3 weeks, and it'll be a month, and then it'll be... The writing is on the wall. Prepare yourself. I'm not saying it's all over at all. I'm just saying this is going to be a frustrating few months. Martin Gurry, and we're going to talk about this when we come back. He writes at the New York Post, the accidental rise of Kamala Harris is a symptom of an unserious age that we are living in. We're going to get to that in just a moment, but don't want to run too late. Keep those comments coming in. Keep those waves coming in. Hour number 2 just getting started here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio with Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, a viewer comment here. Frankly, we do not need to vote or get any questions answered as the media wins, and we will have a queen. Everyone believes every word of the media. No election needed. Of course, that's said tongue-in-cheek, but that's what it is looking like at the current time. Marty Gurin says, help me out. Kamala Harris is the Democrat Party's presidential candidate. How on earth did that happen? And what about the other guy? You know, the sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden? I realize he withdrew from the race in the constitutionally mandated manner by posting a sullen document on X, the digital platform formerly known as Twitter. That was well done. Biden managed to make Elon Musk happy after all these years. But why did Joe go? He never said. Actually, he made it clear that he thought his magnificent record in office merited a second term. If that was true, why not put it to the test? Allowing those randos that we call voters to decide. Biden had something like 14 million votes in the Democratic primaries. No one else had any. His obvious dottiness wasn't the reason either. He never owned up to it. And if he had, he'd have to explain how a man too mentally feeble to be a presidential candidate could continue to serve as president. In the debate with Donald Trump that began the slide to oblivion, Biden's empty eyes and zombie-like groaning, we were told, had to be written off as a really bad night. He said he was quitting the race because saving our democracy was more important than personal ambition. Now, I happen to agree that Biden retiring permanently to the basement of his Delaware home is a boon to American democracy, but that was true from Inauguration Day. Why did he inflict his personal ambition on us for 3.5 years? I'm an analyst. I don't prophesize the future, but I'm supposed to know why the President of the United States suddenly wakes up one morning and decides to give up his candidacy. So I'm going to run with a conspiracy theory because why not? I believe Biden, Dr. Jill, Hunter, all believe he deserved a second term, but were pushed aside by the two kingmakers who secretly run the Democrat Party, George Clooney and the New York Times. That still doesn't get us to Harris. She's the vice president, not the alternative candidate. If Biden faltered, she would automatically inherit the presidency, but not his primary votes or delegates. The Democrats could have opted for an open convention. They have a strong bench, or at least that's what we keep hearing. Instead, almost on a dare, the shakers and breakers of the party settled on the one candidate who has consistently polled more poorly than the president, and who, like Biden, has made an eternal enemy of the English language. But they realize they can prop up any candidate for long enough. Listen, they are making it sound like the candidate that no one liked in the party, that not a single Democrat voted for back the last go-around in 2020, was now all of a sudden, like Rich Lowry said, the second coming of Barack Obama. Harris sounds like a kindergartner teacher who has forgotten her lesson. Her words scatter and float away like helium balloons into the clouds. In Washington, D.C., rife with imposters and empty suits, hers is a truly authentic lightness of being. Her abrupt elevation has been called a coup. But it wasn't. There were no tanks running over rioting Biden diehards. And the Democrats are entitled to anoint anyone they wish for the candidacy. It's their party, as they say. But the rapid speed of the swap startled many inside the power structure. We know Biden was surprised because he needed a second tweet saying, Kamala, for you, you know that thing. We know Harris was surprised because that's her normal state of mind. We know the Democratic presidential campaign, which Harris inherited, was totally befuddled because it set out at once to invent a whole new person to be known henceforth as Kamala Harris. This pure creature had never been named immigration czar or border czar, had never ranked most liberal in the Senate, had never donated to bail for violent criminals or advocating defunding the police. It was telling, I should think, that the campaign preferred a Harris who had never done anything, a Harris who resembled a bout of amnesia, liberated from every memory of the past. Even with the assistance of this media, this replacement of a replacement is unlikely to catch on. If you want a blank slate, go for Whitmer. Harris, alas, is too memorable in her own unique way. Americans are eager to learn the political principles that motivate the new candidate. Her handlers, we have seen, would rather she not have any. But that's the problem. We can't take it in the mindset that this is a full presidential campaign. This is a 4-month presidential campaign. So the media's not going to talk about her background of like that, donating to bail for violent criminals or advocating for defunding the police or being the most liberal in the Senate. That is not going to be a focus. It's going to be the whole time about her major, impressive trajectory in this race. I'm not going to go through this whole piece, but I think it raised some good points that it is kind of showing us in an unserious age. And here I return to my initial observation. Kamala Harris, president. Eventually, I have slipped into an alternative dimension of time and space, a region where the laws of probability have been abolished. I offer these facts for your consideration. Harris has no personal following. Why should she? She wasn't going anywhere. She had no entourage of trusted experts to enlighten her on the issues. The experts were buzzing around Biden, who was supposed to be the candidate, until he wasn't. Her personality in public is comical, and in private, it hasn't exactly been a magnet to party activists or intellectuals. We heard about how bad it is to work for her. By all accounts, her staff hate her and go running for the door at the first opportunity. Her name isn't closely identified with a particular cause or issue. She's a pretty terrible politician. She underperformed as a vote getter in deep blue California. She self-detonated before the first primary won in 2020. She sought the presidential candidacy on her own merits. As might be expected from somebody whose words break free of earthly gravity, she's a bad debater. That's why Trump's got a debater. And I'm starting to get a bad feeling that may not happen. But what Tulsi Gabbard did to her in the 2020 Democratic debates was horrifying to watch. The equivalent of Bambi versus Godzilla. Her campaign never recovered from that thrashing. Harris is like the feather in the wind at the end of Forrest Gump. She's a historical accident. That in less than 4 months, she could be the most powerful woman on earth, decided between war and peace. Her manicured fingers fitting casually over the nuclear button fills me with awe and astonishment over the perversity of our age. Very deep there, but it raises some very interesting points. If you think back at her time in the limelight, back in 2020, with that failed campaign, and we were told for a long time, not even by Democrats, that she's not that good a candidate. Nobody wants her to be a candidate. She's probably, once this administration's done, which they figure would be 8 years, she'll probably, get a cushy job somewhere, but it's going to be all over. Now they have to prop her up, just like they have continued to prop up Joe Biden. We've got more on this and other issues to get to as well. We are smooth sailing this morning. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Kind of a gloomy day this morning. A comment from a viewer. I believe that the Democrat Party is picking candidates by not how intelligent they are or how good of a leader they are, but rather how easy they are to be controlled by someone else in the background. Basically, a pretty front person. Thank you very much. Hey, this is interesting to me because we've only talked about it real quickly this morning. But from the New York Post, they say, as the stock market falls, so does Biden's White House of economic cards. And I pose this question to you, and you know the answer. How would yesterday's stock market fall? How would that be covered if it were, let's say, Trump running for re-election? This was almost glanced over. Investors are showing they have no confidence, that their confidence is sinking like a stone with the worst recent losses suffered by leading companies in the tech sector, a longtime engine of American economic growth that seems to be breaking down in a mire of declining profits. Flawed products, consumer mistrust, and ironically, a decaying relationship with its traditional allies in the Democratic Party. No one on Wall Street trusts either the lame duck incumbent or his anointed successor. And on November 5th, she may well discover that most Americans don't either. I think that's a very good point, and one I was hoping someone in the media would make, that we kept hearing about loss of confidence. I started to wonder how much of that is in the fact that all we're hearing about is Harris's trajectory and how great she's doing, and it's inevitable. She's going to be in the White House, according to media reports. The poll numbers are getting better for her. She's winning all these states that Biden wasn't winning, and that this is just the worst 2 weeks in the history of the world for Donald Trump. Yes, it's getting very, very obnoxious, the coverage, but to think that they ignore a stock market crash, they are really pretty quiet on what's happening in the Middle East right now, because they know that will reflect poorly on Harris as well, as Harris tries to get that, as the media puts it, pro-Palestinian vote, that kind of anti-Israel vote. But speaking of Biden, we got a comment from a viewer. The easiest way for them to spin the stock market crash is to ignore it. Exactly. And that's what we're seeing. I believe it was CNN this morning. I thought, what are they going to have to say about this? Nothing. There was nothing out front. It was all about the vice president. And that's what's something to be said about the vice presidential race right now. And really, if Harris hasn't made up her mind, it was a smart move to keep this dragging out, because this is where the focus is by the media. So we thought we might have it yesterday. We did not get the pick until supposedly today, but that's what the media is laser-like focused on, the Veep race. So I'll be focused on it too. Who do you think it's going to be at the end of the day? Because we're supposed to know by later this, I think evening is the rally. Now, I had mentioned this at the top of the show. Pelosi and Biden haven't spoken since he dropped out of the presidential race. Now, we saw that smirk from her over the weekend when she was asked about if she was influential in getting Biden not to run for a second term. I mean, think about the loyalty there. And this is rare. I mean, we've talked about it a million times. Democrats normally rally around each other. That's why many of us who for years witnessed that were watching the coverage of this with bated breath, thinking, what in the world is going on? This is not typical. This is not what the media and the left do to each other. But Pelosi, it is believed, was one of the most influential. Her, Schumer, Obama, in pushing Biden out. Now we know, well, there was speculation at the time that kind of the payback for Biden was he said, okay, I'm stepping aside and I'm going to endorse Harris instantly. Because the powerful elite did not want it to be Harris for obvious reasons. She did not have good polling numbers. She will now, because again, this is the honeymoon that will last 4 months. This is for those that are not informed, that are watching this, think that Harris is a completely different person. May not have been that familiar with Harris to begin with because she was so quiet in her 4 years as VP. So this is like painting a new candidate. But that was the speculation, was as Biden's kind of punishment. Okay, you got me out. Well, you have to now try to win this thing with Harris. It was rumored that Obama actually wanted to be Mark Kelly. That's why I'm surprised that Mark Kelly's name hasn't really been thrown around much in the last few days for the vice presidential race. It's been basically Shapiro and Walz. I don't know what caused Kelly to be kind of dropped. That was a tangent there, though. I apologize. Pelosi and Biden haven't spoken since he dropped out of the 2024 presidential race. That's according to an interview she gave yesterday on none other than CNN. The last time the two Democrats conversed would then be when Pelosi spoke with Biden before he announced on July 21st that he had ended his bid for a second term. I was asking for a campaign that would win, and I wasn't seeing that on the horizon. Ooh, that's a nasty way of putting that. I was asking for a campaign that would win, and I wasn't seeing that on the horizon. She has denied rumors that she led the charge of Democrats pushing Biden to take his name out of the running. But when asked if everything was okay with the relationship on CNN, Pelosi didn't give a direct answer. You'd have to ask him, but I hope so. Look, I love Joe Biden, respected him for over 40 years. Sounds like maybe there isn't too much love lost anymore if you have to ask him. Would you say that about, let's say, one of your best friends? Are you guys still get along? You'd have to ask him. That's not a typical answer. We know at the time that it was reported anyway that she was reading Biden the poll numbers showing him that he could not win. Biden reportedly pushed back and was seething at Pelosi at the time. Back reported by CNN back when that happened. Pelosi has attempted to distance herself from the narrative that she led the movement to push Biden out of the race, instead laying on the compliments to the legacy of the president, which has been, he should be on Mount Rushmore. He was wonderful. Now, they asked her about Kamala Harris. Pelosi called the former prosecutor very politically astute, as demonstrated by her win in a competitive primary for California's Attorney General. The unlikely rise. Yes. We've got some comments coming in. But Nancy Pelosi, this is how Piers Morgan put it. We'll tell you what he had to say when we come back. Nancy Pelosi murdered Joe Biden's political career, but now she wants him on Mount Rushmore. What a shameless hypocrite. I'm not the biggest Piers Morgan fan, but there's a couple points to take away from this. Also, what do you think about RFK Jr. and the Bear? What do you think about Raskin and that comment we read earlier, Secret Service? So much more to get to. Feel free to comment on that or anything else you'd like to comment on. And when we come back, we'll read as many as we possibly can. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. If you recall, and I've got some comments coming up in just a moment. If you recall, I had told you about the Salvation Army of Corning and their Filler Up, some call it a contest. I just call it a fundraiser. But local businesses here on Market Street had mini kennels up. Mini kettles, I don't know why I'm struggling with that word, where you could donate for a little over a week. And the business that received the most donations to go to the Salvation Army of Corning would be given the bragging rights of being the champion. So I have received the tallies from the Salvation Army of Corning. Let's see who won the Filler Up contest. Coming in third place, Anelio's Pizzeria. Coming in second place, Sorge's Restaurant, and the winner receiving the most money for the amazing work that the Salvation Army of Corning does, it was Connors Mercantile. So congratulations to them for, at the end of the day, doing something amazing for such a good cause. And I'll be telling you about other fundraising events coming up soon for the Salvation Army of Corning. One comment from a viewer as we move along. The stock market crashed because nobody can afford to buy anything. Thanks, Democrats. Well, going back to the stock market falling, which again, look, the media's coverage of this shows you how much in the tank they are for the Harris campaign. Biden's irresponsible strategy ballooned the national debt by $7.9 trillion, boosted inflation, and drove up interest rates. Its obvious political goal was to keep a lid on deeper economic problems while the incumbent president was still campaigning for re-election. Now the lie is falling apart. After steadily rising over the past few months, unemployment stands at its highest level in 3 years, accompanied by a worsening national affordability crisis, rising consumer debt, and persisting inflation. Even as the election campaign gets nastier, most Americans will face November poorer, angrier, deeper in debt, more frustrated, and less certain of their future than in any election since Jimmy Carter. That's bad news for Harris, whose campaign has advanced no economic policy of any kind, while Biden and most congressional Democrats favor tax hikes, yet more debt-based government spending and no meaningful solution to illegal immigration, which has enduring economic consequences. Another comment from a different viewer. All true on the unlikely rise of Kamala Harris. I believe that the Democrats are a lot of unsavory things, but stupid isn't one of them. They have a plan that hasn't been fully unfolded yet. They obviously have no allegiance to their voters, and I guess the Democrat sheeple are okay with that. There will be an August or September surprise that only the Democrat kingmakers know. Yeah, well, I mean, think about that. August surprise. The campaign just started, folks. We are moving quick. It's keep that in mind. It's not the normal campaign, and it's getting kind of frustrating. But I wanted to mention Nancy Pelosi in this Piers Morgan piece. Nancy Pelosi was what we British would call a brass neck. It's a saying that alludes to someone so thick-skinned and makes them utterly impervious to any sense of shame for their self-interested or hypocritical actions. It's an open secret in Washington that Pelosi just did to Joe Biden what Marcus Brutus did to Julius Caesar. Of course, she didn't actually kill him, but she did kill his political career, and she did it in a manner so ruthless that I'm told on a reliable authority that Biden will never forgive her for it. Hence the reason why she was asked, are you still friends? And she said, well, you'll have to ask him. Following the president's humiliating debate debacle with Donald Trump, Pelosi appointed herself chief assassin, albeit one who continued to support him publicly while knifing him in the back behind the scenes. As Politico reported back in July, the speaker does not want to call on him to resign, but she will do everything in her power to make sure it happens. That's exactly what she did. Until Biden finally fell on the sword, she dropped in front of him. So Joe Biden was forced to quit his dream job, the one he had fought so ardently to get his whole political life, and the one he never had any desire or intention of voluntarily giving up. By backing out of the race just 4 months before the election and 6 months before the end of his first term, Biden instantly entered the area of the biggest ever presidential losers. Yes, it destroyed any kind of legacy, no matter what they're trying to say now, the Mount Rushmore and all this. It destroyed that legacy. Because, yes, right now there's such an anti-Trump movement that they think anybody but Trump. And if that means stepping aside, then you're a hero, Biden. That's not how the history books are going to be remembering him. But I'll continue. In the process, he also became a global laughingstock, the object of ridicule, mockery, and embarrassment that reportedly left him feeling utterly crushed. Yet on Sunday, Nancy Pelosi popping up, adding that he should be on Mount Rushmore. Like I said, she's got a brass neck. In fact, it would be hard to think of any female politician in American political history whose neck is made of a stronger alloy of copper and zinc. But she's also got a forked tongue. No, I wasn't a leader of any pressure party, she lied. Well, let me say things that I didn't do. I didn't call one person. I did not call one person. I could always say to him, I never called anybody. Even if you take her at her word, which I don't, this was akin to hearing the aforementioned Michael Corleone saying he never killed his mafia mob boss rivals. Technically, he didn't. He just got his people to do it. Pelosi continued, I don't want to go through all this because this is the problem. Piers Morgan gets a little bit too much in the weeds. But what Biden really knows is one of his closest friends in politics, someone he's known and worked with for 40 years, and who, like him, is a devout Roman Catholic who carries rosary beads in her pocket, pounced on him at his most vulnerable moment and devoured him like a jackal feasting on the elderly bison. And in that moment, Nancy Pelosi revealed who she really is, a ruthless, conniving, merciless, disloyal version of Marcus Brutus. Powerful. There's more there. If you want to find out more, the whole piece by Piers Morgan is on the New York Post. But we got a lot of comments coming in. We're going to get to those when we come back from break. I have a little time, though. So what do you think about RFK Jr.? Kristen Flemings, I thought, kind of put it funny. Brainworms and goats and bears, oh my. It's just another day in the wild, wild Robert F. Kennedy Jr. presidential campaign. Let me ask you this, because I know in kind of political people, especially if you're on the Democrat side, the Kennedy name has such importance. The Kennedy name is something that Democrats really look to as, Camelot. What do you think of the way he's running this campaign? Is it a stain on the Kennedy reputation? Is it a knock? I mean, I'm not the biggest Kennedy fan, so I can't really answer that. I'm just curious if some of the pieces that I've read is almost like, why did you do this to the family name? But I think you could point to other things that were maybe done to the family name. But anyway, Kristen Flemings believes he looks like Sideshow Bob. Kennedy's bid as an independent has included a worm that ate his brain, a barbecued animal carcass, okay, and a video of him doing shirtless push-ups in jeans. And then there was a press dinner last July at which the environmental lawyer was meant to equate himself with reporters. Instead, someone else stole the show, and I'm not going to tell you why. How dignified. And now the latest, Kennedy's confession to Roseanne Barr that he left a dead baby bear in Central Park a decade ago. The admission ended a long-running urban mystery that when the cub was first discovered in 2014 was widely covered in the media. That includes a story by a New York Times reporter. Oddly enough, the daughter of Kennedy's first cousin. It's hard to decide which detail is the weirdest. I don't want to go through the whole story, okay? At all. Because you've seen the picture, you've seen the weirdness of his campaign on full display. But I know there are some out there that really do support him, meaning some that watch this show. So I would be curious what you think of this story, and can it get any crazier? I mentioned it earlier, but Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski tried to kind of laugh about it in a way, saying it was bizarre. They didn't understand that you could eat the meat. Spent a full 10 minutes on it. So at least he's getting, hey, what, no publicity is bad publicity? All right, we got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Getting ready to wrap this up. Boy, this show's going quick. We're going to talk about the Trump campaign when we come back, but I do find it interesting to know where you stand on the RFK Jr. Bear story. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be, where's my button? We'll be right back. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Let's get back into the nitty-gritty here, if we will. CNBC host Jim Cramer was on Squawk on the Street yesterday. And he said, I'm saying, who is that? And the vice president. We don't know who the vice presidential candidate is. How about Tony West surfacing? My guy Tony West would make it so you have to rethink how left Kamala is. I think people should do that. Tony West at PepsiCo. There was no business person really that close to Biden. Cramer then added, this is a nice change of pace. A lot of business people surrounding Harris if you're in the stock market. If you care about your paycheck, you go with Trump. That is what you do. He wants to cut your taxes. Yeah, they're not going to own up on this stock market at all. This is going to be really interesting to see the way the media covers it. Sorry, it's up in my eye. Trump saying calling it the Kamala crash. Of course there was a massive market downturn. Kamala is even worse than Crooked Joe. Markets will never accept the radical left lunatic that destroyed San Francisco and California as a whole. Next move, the Great Depression of 2024. You can't play games with markets. Kamala crash. This is former President Trump tweeting out or truthing out. The Republican presidential nominee followed up with another post saying the election comes down to voters' choice between Trump prosperity or the Kamala crash and Great Depression of 2024. Probability of World War III if these very stupid people remain in office. Remember, Trump was right about everything. Sounds like a typical Trump quote. I do find it amazing that there's no media person that was intellectually curious about what Harris thought of the crash. Did I not see a statement? Harris and her campaign stayed notably silent about the market decline as of the last time I checked. And the Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, is calling her out for it. This moment could set off a real economic calamity around the globe. It requires steady leadership, the kind President Trump delivered for 4 years. Kamala Harris is too afraid to answer media questions and cannot lead us in these troubled times. I do believe there is a real fear there of her answering questions. I don't think she's going to want to debate. Now, I didn't think Biden was going to debate because of his mental decline. I was wrong. I fully admit that I was wrong. He did the debate. I was right in the sense he shouldn't have done the debate. So I don't think Harris, what are your thoughts? Do you think Harris wants to debate? She's not going to do the Fox News debate. But then does Trump go stubborn and say, well, if you're not doing Fox News, we're not going to do anything? I don't think that's a good idea for the Trump campaign because you are going to have a love fest from the media for the next 4 months. So how do you have the opportunity to get Harris to show who she really is? Because it's not going to be the stump speeches that she's giving with a teleprompter, because that's what she's going to do for the next 4 months. So is that the opportunity to show the difference between Trump and Harris? But do you think there will be a debate? And if so, if not, who do you think's the ultimate blame on that? All right. Yes, no, I know about the Kennedys. That's what I'm saying. Thank you for the comment, though. Yep, that's where they got their money, from bootlegging in the early days. Yes, a lot of background, and you didn't mention Ted Kennedy and the like. So I was just wondering if those who like Kennedy, I understand that viewer does not like Kennedy, but if there are those that like Kennedy, where do you stand, the Kennedy name, I should say, where do you stand on this campaign? And does it hurt that supposed Kennedy name? Okay, so I had mentioned Raskin, Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, who speculated that Congress would have to invalidate an election victory by former President Trump at the risk of a civil war. Now, and I pointed this out before, it's not clear whether Raskin was actually outlining a plan of action or whether using a hypothetical to argue that the U.S. Supreme Court was placing what he considered an undue burden on Congress to keep Trump out of office. So there's that quote, and you can feel free to weigh in on this. Remember, this coming from the party lecturing us about democracy, already coming off the back when they try to keep Trump off the ballot altogether. And, of course, you have the lawfare. And, of course, you have now the Democrat nominee who has never been voted on to be the presidential nominee once. Never had received one vote from a Democrat to be the presidential nominee. Yet here we are today, the virtual roll call last night, and she is the official nominee. So you've got Raskin describing that scenario. Then listen to this. Inside, this is from CNN. Inside the legal plans by foes of Donald Trump and Project 2025 to fight his second-term agenda. Can I just pause and say, what is this Project 2025? I'm not saying as if I don't know what it is, but it's not a political issue. This is one group that came up with their kind of dream of what would happen in the Trump presidency. I know a lot of Republicans. We've talked with a lot of Republicans. This has never been an agenda. This has never been a plan. This has never been something pushed by anybody but outside that group. But boy, the media is running with it, aren't they? So now they're looking at, and this is CNN, so they want to see Democrats win. This is admitting that the plans on lawfare continue, especially if Trump wins the presidency. That the lawfare is just beginning. It's kind of a threat, if you will, inside the legal plans. If Donald Trump is elected, he'll take office next year, having learned the lessons of 4 years of legal battles in his first term, during which inexperienced personnel, slapdash policymaking, and his own indifference to how the federal government worked made his agenda especially vulnerable to legal challenges. Okay, now I'm confused by this comment. Come on, don't be afraid of the truth. Read it. It was a movie about Kennedy's dad's life. I said he ran bootleg whiskey and they cheated and then they had extramarital affairs. What? I just said that. Okay. Sorry, I didn't. I don't know. I don't understand where that viewer comment came from. Okay. So back to what I was saying. The 2024 Republican nominee already has a clear idea of how he jumpstart a second term with plans to immediately enact hardline immigration policies and to dismantle civil service protections for thousands of federal employees. His allies, including the influential conservative organizations that have participated in the endeavor known as Project 2025, have crafted policy papers and vetted potential Trump-aligned staff that could swiftly be hired to the federal government. Folks, I've had so many people ask me about this, friends that don't lean Republican at all, asking me about the 2025 thing. It is so overhyped and overblown by the media. It blows my mind. But we got to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, wrapping up today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody joining us. Hey, just in time for election, New York is starting to mail $350 million in Empire State Child Tax Credit checks to residents. Just in time for Election Day. Thank you, Governor Hochul. Did you see that the Secret Service says it disposed of the cocaine that it found at the White House, and now we're learning that there was a partial DNA hit? And that's why many speculated it was disposed of. The evidence from the investigation was disposed of in accordance with retention policies, their spokesperson said. Now, it was reported back at the time that Kimberly Cheadle, who's no longer there, wanted to destroy the cocaine but faced internal opposition because it was supposed to be retained for 7 years. That's evidence is supposed to be retained for 7 years. She wanted it gone, which made sense. She was appointed, pushed through by Dr. Jill Biden. Two sources told the outlet that Cheadle or someone speaking at her direction called the agency's forensic division vault supervisor, Matt White, and asked him to dispose of the evidence because leadership wanted to close the case. Three sources connected to the Secret Service told Real Clear Politics that DNA had been recovered from the half-used dime bag, allowing for a partial hit in a national database after the drug was found on July 2nd, 2023. The Secret Service closed its investigation just 11 days after the cocaine was found without interviewing any potential suspects, given the impression that the agency wasn't interested in learning the facts behind the embarrassing incident. But it's interesting that they found a partial DNA match. Maybe that's why it needed to be destroyed so quickly. Here's a question from a viewer. Can media types be held accountable for cover-ups? I know this sounds crazy, but consider that if you lie in a court of law, you'll be nailed with a contempt of court, etc. That's a great question. The perjury, the libel, libel, the slander. It's tough. It is really tough to get those charges brought, for lack of a better word, or the lawsuit filed. Because I know that former President Trump talked about it quite a bit when he was president. Yeah, that's a great question because, listen, they're not going to be held accountable because who's going to go after them, unfortunately? The cover-ups going all the way back for years. I mean, the cover-ups are what the media does. That's what they're doing right now to keep Kamala Harris propped up. Josh Hawley reveals that new whistleblowers claim about Secret Service failures at the Trump rally that he's scared to death. The site agent, the lead agent, was known to the Trump campaign to be inexperienced, to be ineffectual, to be frankly incompetent at their job. I'm also told by whistleblowers that on that day she was not enforcing the normal security protocols. She was not checking people's ID. She did not use Secret Service agents. Most of the agents there that day were not Secret Service agents. They were Homeland Security agents. Whistleblowers are coming forward from the Secret Service because they can't believe what leadership is doing. They cannot believe that Secret Service is not taking action to clear out the rot. No, they're just doing it, as has been said by many, to cover themselves. Frankly, they're scared to death that this is going to happen again. We can't let it happen again. We got to get the facts. I urge you to suspend the lead site agent from all Secret Service duties immediately while these claims are investigated. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Boy, did we cover a lot of topics, didn't we? Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all the waves. We have a busy week. Guests on the program all the rest of the week. I did want to remind you Now, on Thursday, we'll be talking with former Congressman Joe Sempolinski. He'll be joining us, so if you have any questions to get to ahead of time, a lot of times we get so many questions during his time on the show, we don't have an opportunity to get to all of them. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns for former Congressman Joe Sempolinski, send them along. And I hope that you have a great day and that you'll join us every weekday morning starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We will see you tomorrow morning bright and early. I look forward to it already.